One thing that I wanted to ask you about with regard to UBI was the structure of UBI, because as I initially understood it, which it seems incorrect, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's a universal program. However, the caveat is that it's opt-in. So to kind of tie this to a real-world example so I can kind of get a better grasp of how it would work in reality, my dad, for example, he receives Social Security insurance every single month of $1,300 per month. So with your proposal, he would have to choose between UBI and Social Security insurance. So my question then becomes, if he has to pick between these, and obviously he's going to opt for the $1,300 option because, you know, basic math, it's more money.
It's higher.
Then, exactly, it's higher, so it makes more sense for him to do that. But effectively, he would not be getting an extra $1,000 because with my parents, they live paycheck to paycheck. They wait for that $1,300 check every single month. But if you increased them and supplemented what they already got, give them an extra $1,000, that would radically change their lives. But they'd have to opt in to UBI and they wouldn't get that additionally. Meanwhile, someone who makes $100,000 per year, who's firmly in the middle class, they'd get the extra $1,000. So even if I like that you're pitching this as a universal program, don't you think that that opt-in caveat kind of undermines the universality of it?
Well, the $1,300 that your father receives, is that for both him and your mother? Are they both in the same household?
So I believe my father receives $1,300 and my mom gets $400 or something along those lines.
Yeah. So, and this is not an atypical situation, and it's why I ask, is that for your parents, your mom would also be entitled to the Freedom Dividend, and so she looks at her $400, and this is not unusual because a lot of women went years without developing work histories, often because they're raising kids, and then their Social Security benefits are much lower, and so your parents' net benefit would be $600 because your dad's like, hey, I'm getting $1,300, so pass in the Freedom Dividend, and your mom's like, ooh, Freedom Dividend,
right? Right.
And then, the extra $600 would be really significant for household on a fixed income. And so it is true that certain people who are in existing programs might benefit a bit less, though, as you know, $600 on top of the $1,700 they're currently getting would be like a huge relief. I mean, that would be, like maybe a 33% increase. So it might not sound like, ooh, $600 a month, who cares? But that's actually like really significant if you're operating on a fixed income.
It would be substantial. But and so technically, if you're looking at couples, then they would technically get $2,000 per month. But that still begs the question: why would someone, for example, on Social Security disability have to choose? Why would they not get as much as someone who's making $100,000 per year? Do you kind of see? So there's just a disconnect, and I'm hoping that you can fill me in on that if I'm genuinely misunderstanding.
No. Well, your understanding of it is correct. So there are some problems that the Freedom Dividend is well designed to solve, and then some that it is less well designed to solve. Honestly, like it's very well designed to help empower millions of American workers and people in tough situations. It will make children and families stronger. It will improve our health and nutrition, mental health, relationships. It'll make workers tougher to exploit. Does it do as much for someone who's already receiving Social Security and other benefits? It does not do as much for those households. And to me, that's like a separate problem that we have to tackle and solve, which is that Social Security is supposed to go insolvent. And I think it's 18 years or something.
To be clear, just so people know, it actually rolls over. So, for example, it's scheduled to go insolvent in 2038, for example, but then next year it'll be scheduled to go insolvent in 2039, and then it just starts paying out 80% in the event it still isn't fully solvent. But I do agree with that there needs to be something. I think lifting the cap on Social Security is a really good solution. Is that something that you'd support?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
There's like an unrelated crisis. It's related but unrelated. So we have tens of millions of aging Americans who do not have adequate retirement savings.
Right.
And we're about to be a society where you're seeing old people working until the day they die and dying on the street and living under bridges, all sorts of incredibly horrific things where, again, if we're the richest and most advanced society in the history of the world, that's unacceptable. And we should make big moves to address that. And the freedom dividend would help some of those situations because it's very common, like your parents, where you have two people who are receiving together jointly less than $2,000. But the freedom dividend is not actually designed to solve that problem as much as it's designed to solve other situations and problems. Do I agree that this retirement savings crisis and the home healthcare crisis and all of these need to have massive resources put to work? Yeah, 100%. And if you were to say, hey, the freedom dividend does not address that as effectively as it addresses other situations, I would agree with that as well.
How you pay for the freedom dividend. Explain how you pay for it in 3 or 4 sentences. We got a little more time than that, but how do you simply say how we pay for this thing?
All right, so there are 4 ways you can think of getting the money. But number 1 is, right now we have the biggest companies in our country that are paying 0 or near 0 in taxes. Amazon, $1 trillion tech company, 0 in taxes. Netflix, 0 in taxes. Google moves a lot of earnings to Ireland. They don't pay 0, but they pay a lot less than you'd think. Parking tens of billions of dollars in other parts of the world. So number 1 is how do you pay for it? You give us a slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile, hundreds of billions in new revenue. And so this is the thing that maybe these numbers help people. It's someone looks at it and says something like Andrew, how can you pay for that? Isn't that, let's call it 2.4 trillion a year or something like that? And then you say, wow, that sounds like a lot of money. Our GDP is 21 trillion. And then someone's like, when people think about these numbers, it's we are the richest, most advanced economy in the history of the world. If you put it in the size of our economy, then let's call it 2.4 doesn't sound as bad. But if you start with this 2.4, if you have this mechanism where we share in the gains of the biggest winners of the 21st century economy, generates, let's call it 800 billion plus.
Right. And what's the total cost of this plan?
Let's call it 2.4 trillion, which is about right.
2.4. And 800 billion would you get from
the value-added tax and the rest of it. All right. So
which every other country has. Developed country.
Every other developed country already has it.
So people say it's crazy.
Oh no, any economist looks at it. The tax foundation, the tax foundation was this is actually the best mechanism. Everyone kind of knows it. The only reason the value-added tax not been on the table in America is because the companies have been lobbying the crap out of it to try and keep it off the table. That's really it.
Right.
All right. So then you're okay, 800 billion is not 2.4 trillion. So what's up with that? And you're well, here's where some of the magic occurs. After you put the money into our hands, we spend it. It ends up growing our consumer economy quite significantly. The money circulates over and over again, and then we get more tax revenue for the fact that there is more purchasing, more traveling, more business starts, more hiring. All of that stuff generates hundreds of billions of dollars, depending upon how aggressive you get with how much the growth is going to be. Let's call it 500 billion. Which is reasonable. So then you're at 1.3, so you have another 1.1 you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Then you save hundreds of billions on things like emergency room healthcare that we spend hundreds of billions on now. Incarceration. I was with a corrections officer in New Hampshire who said we should pay people to stay out of jail because it's so costly when they're in jail. And this is a corrections officer, mind you. So you save billions on incarceration. You save billions on homelessness services. You spend billions essentially on what we currently are putting in place to try and pick up the pieces very often.
Right.
So then you're down to, let's call it a little bit less than $1 trillion left. And then there was one study that showed that if you were to alleviate extreme poverty in this country, you would increase our GDP by 700 billion just on the basis of better educational outcomes, better health outcomes, better mental health. And then, so this is a massive investment in our human capital. If you're a company, all the time as a company, you go around saying, hey, we have to invest in our people. We have to invest in our people. Because the thought is if you invest in your people, then they'll be more productive and then your company wins. We've all at least heard that. I mean, if you work for a good company, if you work for one of the rich companies, they actually send you to some ridiculous training for a week.
Yeah.
Where and then you were hey, did I learn anything in this training? sort of, but like I really appreciated it, and then so like it sinks in, like you actually feel that, and then in the public sector we try and disinvest. We try and be like, let's not spend any money on that person,
right.
And then we end up getting stuck with the bill later. So if you invest in your human capital, you end up increasing the size of the pie by hundreds of billions conservatively, and then we get a lot of that value back, especially because it's literally us. So to go through the list again, fair share of the winners of the 21st century economy, cost savings on emergency room healthcare, homelessness services, incarceration, and various social ills, economic growth. Actually reverse that. So I'll say economic growth number 2, incarceration, homelessness services, and emergency room healthcare is number 3, and like the other things that we spend money on. And the number 4 is better health outcomes, better education outcomes, stronger human capital, better mental health, better decision making, higher productivity, higher entrepreneurship, etc. So if you add these 4 up, you come pretty close to the 2.4 trillion headline number. And again, you have to bear in mind that like this is money in our hands. That if you're a company and you say, hey, we're going to pay a dividend, no one ever says, well, that's a waste of money, because by definition, it can't be a waste of money. It's like, it's the money getting returned to shareholders. In this case, the money literally goes to us. We're the citizens and shareholders of this country. It's actually the best possible use of proceeds.
Right.
Because if the money goes to us, then we're the best determiners of how to allocate those resources.
One of the things
So that was a little bit long-winded. I'm sorry about that.
but you summed it up.
But I summed it up.
Yeah. One of the things you say a lot is one of the biggest lies in America is that we don't have the money.
Oh yeah, Zach knows this too. Biggest lies in America is we don't have the money. And there's like this, there really is some very strange stuff going on where people, another way, it's like people say like, how do you pay for it? You could say this: how did we pay for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street? You remember voting for that? Remember getting the referendum being like, do you want to vote for the $4 trillion bailout? Do you remember anyone caterwauling about where you're going to get the money? Do you remember that? I don't. No, it was like, hey, the banks need $4 trillion. Let's do it. Let's pull that. Let's pull the lever. And during that time, and it was a tough time, like literally our society was on the precipice, so you can't Monday morning quarterback it too much. But if you had a choice between bailing out the banks and trying to keep more Americans in their homes, like let's say forgiving some of the mortgage debt and the rest of it, in my mind, you should definitely have done some of the latter